presentation from NR. He actually had the PIC presentation, but I
All right, are we unmuted?
I did unmute. Yes. Try to tell me.
Okay, somebody just said yes. All right. All right, if everyone can find their seats, please. Everyone can find your seats. Thank you. All right, welcome back, everyone. I hope you found something acceptable for lunch. We're going to get back in with our operating experience data, starting with John Lane. John, if you could give us a sentence or two about who you are and what you're here to talk about.
Okay, sure. John Lane, Senior Reliability and Risk Engineer. I've been on the OPI data program over 10 years now, which is kind of unusual at the NRC because we change jobs pretty frequently. But I've been fortunate to be with the OPI program going back to 2012 or so, I would say, something along those lines. And it's been a wonderful experience. Like to start? Next slide, please. I'd like to go over a little bit of a primer on OPI, because I think it to get everybody on the same page on how far it does go back and the commitments that have been made over the years by NRC and by industry both. Going to talk a little bit about the staff who uses the OPI data, the staff, the industry, the public as well, and a little bit about the mechanics of how we gather the data and we house it primarily at INL, but also at NRC as well. And we'll try to tie in a little bit about realism too. Next slide, please. So to start with, basically, even presidents love OPI because Jimmy Carter in the 70s, in the late 70s, brought out his statement that we need to make mandatory the voluntary reporting of minor mishaps. So going all the way back there, I can't vouch for bipartisanship otherwise around here, but I think at least in terms of industry and NRC, there's been a lot of bipartisan agreement on the importance of OPI. Basically, the first significant attempt to catalog and gather OPI was NPRDS, which was an Edison Electric Institute program managed by Southwest. NRC, the rudiments of the LER program were in the late 70s also. That was New Reg 161. They were called reportable occurrences at that time. The Lewis Committee report on WASH 1400, one of the concerns or comments was we need a better treatment of uncertainty and consequences, and so they called on an improvement in data collection. The accident sequence precursor program came about in the early 80s. The LER rule was formalized in 1983. And the LERs originally were managed for NRC. Back in the days of mainframes, they were managed at Oak Ridge National Lab. Eventually, they became available more readily to the NRC staff, but initially, if you wanted a study done on LERs, we would go to INL or go to Oak Ridge rather for help on that. Next slide, please. Realism has been fundamental to OP-E. After TMI, the TMI action plan, a program that I don't think is too well known, the IREP program, Interim Reliability and Evaluation Program. That was one of the first attempts to actually gather data plant by plant and issue reports on them. I happen to find one from 1982, New Reg CR 2802 on Browns Ferry 1. But it was basically a PRA, and it's sort of, it came in that time frame between WASH 1400 and New Reg 1150. So it was an evolution from WASH 1400 and of course a recognition of PRA, and along with that, the data. The maintenance rule came around in 1991, and that was also an acknowledgement that it wouldn't work without additional OP-E capability for setting performance goals, and that was one of the reasons why EPICS was created by INPO. EPICS was a voluntary upgrade to NBRDS. NRC partially funds that database even to this day. We maintain a multi-year contract with INPO for access to the data. Next, please. The MSPI program was also the Mitigating System Performance Index in 2005 was a significant upgrade because it tracked data for key safety systems like AC power, high pressure injection, RHR, and it also included demand data, which has always been in a little short supply. It's the demand data that helps the analyst figure out what the actual parameters are. So a lot of times we'll have to estimate demand data, but at least with the 5 key systems discussed in MSPI, AC power, high pressure injection, heat removal, cooling water, and RHR, that is provided in much greater detail by all licensees. We've developed tried to get to consistency by using standard methods, statistical methods for analyzing the data. That would be the HOPE manual, the Handbook of Parameter Estimation. We're in the process of updating that. We were planning this year, but it looks like it may slide a little bit depending on funding issues and things like that. And LERs have become much more publicly available with the online access to LERs. I'll be talking about that in a little bit. Next, please. This is my everything, everywhere, all at once slide. And basically, the way to look at this is if you look at the bottom right-hand corner to the OP-E data collection. That's the starting point is the LERs, the unavailabilities from MSPI, monthly operating reports, and the INPO IRIS data. We start from there, we code the information, we create basically databases of the various types of information, loss of offsite power, shutdown events, initiating events, and that finds its way into studies that we publish on our website. And then ultimately, it goes into the SPAR models, and ultimately the models are used for a number of NRC programs, fire, PRA, SDP, ASP, generic issue screening. So it kind of demonstrates essentially the pervasiveness of the data, how it permeates through a huge amount of NRC activities. Next, please. And this slide basically just is it's kind of a tabular listing of what was in the graphical presentation. SDP, the clearinghouse, Management Directive 8.3 on incident investigations. The inspectors have access, and NRC staff also has access to the INPO IRIS database. treatment of SSCs 1059, 5059, fire PRA. I think that's about all I got. Next, please. Basically, when you're looking at realism and OPI data, I think what we're looking for is consistency, attention to detail, and peer review. I'll talk about peer review at the end. In terms of the consistency, that's where we tried to standardize the statistical approaches that we use. That's basically the Handbook of Parameter Estimation. At INL, they have a coding manual with templates which helps the coders analyze the events. And they need to use a fair amount of judgment too, because a lot of times the events leave something to be desired in terms of the narratives. But INL has their own data quality assurance program. They've always been very fortunate to employ either industry people or Navy nuclear people that have a detailed knowledge of systems and are very expert at coding. And many of them have been doing this for 10 years or more easily. And similar to the coding manual, they use drop-down pick lists, things to basically improve consistency so there isn't a great variation unnecessarily. Next, please. So the OPI INPO maintains the IRIS database, as you all know. That is basically the repository for failure events, test results
Settings, right?
in the nuclear industry. Oh, we good? Okay. INL maintains the IDCCS database. That's Integrated Data Collection and Coding System. That's the database that was referred to on the other slide here, where everything is categorized and prepared for analysis. And we'll get to the tools for that in just a second. NRR also maintains the reactor operating experience databases in-house as well. And that's where we have event notices, morning reports, all this inspection activities, plant status, and things like that. But I would say in terms of failure events, it's the INL database where the failure events are primarily located. Next, please. NRC acquires the data. It's proprietary, of course. We acquire it by commercial contract. So NRC staff have access to it as well as INL has access to it. The data is entered by trained utility people, and there's a variety of people that do it. It could be a designated person, or it could be a maintenance rule technician. It could even be a utility manager. So that in a way, there's a sort of a cross-pollination of ideas, so that to make sure that the data is wholesome. In other words, it's complete for the event. That is a challenge, though, that we've found recurring issues with. That even despite the industry's best attempts, we still find that some of the reporting of the events comes up a little bit short. Next slide, please. IDCCS, I mentioned previously, that's the powerhouse database at INL. That's where everything is maintained, the monthly operating reports, which was required by generic letter, LERs, and that's the fundamental storehouse for all the reports that we put on our websites. And as you probably know, most of our reports, if not all of them really, are public. They're all publicly available. And so that's another benefit of all this, is that the public has a chance to realize what the generic numbers are, to the extent that lay practitioners are curious about it. They have access to our generic database results. And I think it also points out to how expensive really the data program is. I mean, maintaining data over a long term is is a relatively expensive proposition. I think everybody who's tried it in industry knows you need consistency in terms of staff. You need the infrastructure behind it. You need cooperation from the people providing the data. And there's a lot of different things that have to go right for the data to be maintained. And of course, the things we publish, the loop studies, loss of main feed water, all the component and system reliability studies, common cause failure studies, things like that. Next slide, please. This is just summarizing the inputs again, LERs, IRIS reports, monthly operating reports, inspection reports. The process at INL has a second review. It had basically a QA check, a second review, and evaluation of the data. Again, it goes to the databases. LER track is where we store the LERs. Those are used primarily for the initiating event data. And the other databases, RADS, IDCCS. I'll talk about that in a second. Next, please. The operating experience results and databases. Oh, I'm sorry. Next, number 13, please. 13 is what I'm looking at. Yeah, 13. Next one back. Yeah. Again, this is where I think not sure everybody in industry realizes what we put out. We have a number of studies that we update about every 2 years now. Our schedule is every 2 years. And of course, it's generic data, but it's valuable because you'll use it for your starting point on your plan updates. Next slide, please. The NROD website is a website, is an application really that enables licensees to go into the IDCCS database and search for the events or LERs that were integrated into the generic values that we publish. So it's been very popular with industry. You could go in with, because it's proprietary, it's only available to NRC licensees / INPO members. And we've had requests from researchers, industries, or universities and things, but we can't really release that because this is proprietary. But it does enable licensees to go in and examine specifically the events that went into the parameters that are in our SPAR models. And ultimately, the whole objective is to get the input into our SPAR models. The RADS calculator is the primary analytical tool that we use to generate the reliability numbers for the components. And that's also available on the website as well. And I think I think a lot of people do use the RAD site just to confirm the numbers that NRC calculates for failure rates and compares it with what their plants have as an updated number using Bayesian updating. And with RADS, you can do all the things listed there: reliability, availability, initiating events, loop, and CCF. Next, please. Another way that we help to ensure realism is the international cooperation that NRC is involved with. A number of things are listed here. The ICDE, the International Common Cause Data Exchange. We've been involved with that for a number of years. There's a number, NRC provides most of the data for some of these things. I think ICDE is one of those examples where most of the international data is provided by NRC. But regardless, there's reviews done, there's peer review done at those meetings. And so I think it still has value, even though much of the data is our data. There's a lot of interaction at the meetings to discuss the impact of the CCF and the various shaping factors and contributions. NRC has got a big influence or big involvement with OECD, WG risk, and operating experience. The IRS incident reporting system is another way that we increase the awareness of international data in comparison with our data. And basically the intent again is a reality check on what's happening internationally overseas versus what we're seeing in this country. INES and CODAP are two other ones. Next, please. Get back to peer review. Over the last 5 years or so, we've had a significant increase, and for the better, of industry peer reviewing our data and coming in with concerns or with suggestions. And a lot of times it's because industry has more insight into the event than we have from our cryptic evaluation of a failure event. So we always welcome peer review and comments. We've had successful evaluations recently on the BWR turbine-driven pumps. We were involved with the audit of the flex parameters a few years ago. EPRI shared their LPSD study with us, and we benefited by that. We were debating about updating our own, and we decided that we would not spend the resources on that because EPRI did such a good job on it. PWR Owners Group had brought some significant concerns in way back in 2021. We did a detailed study. We make a number of adjustments based on the suggestions. Some things we change, some things we don't, but we would always justify if we left a value of failure to start or something like that. We would always justify why we did it and communicate back to the owners group. We have in the past had peer reviews of CCF, primarily with Westinghouse. Haven't had as much of that lately, but part of it is because there really aren't that many CCF events popping up. Maybe a few a year is about it. Next, please. So the final slide, something that Kevin pointed out to me a while back. We really don't know the true value of these parameters. We're trying to estimate them. It's always complaints, the numbers are too high, or, they're not accurate, but you got to recognize they go up, they go down, and we don't know the true value. So we're always trying to estimate it. The recommendation in that regard is to make sure that industry pays attention to the detail when they file the events, because the events, the more descriptive the event is, the easier it is for us to code it and more accurately put it in the right category. So I think that we all benefit by the increased comprehensive reporting and also by the attention to detail. And the final thoughts are that it's possible, we're always looking at AI. There's a possibility with the decrease in the number of LERs. They've dropped way down, which is a good thing. But the LERs, I think, are maybe about 100 a year or something like that now, from thousands before. Looking at possible, even the IRIS data is a little bit under what it was in the past. And I think as long as it reflects improved reliability and no failures, that's good. But we also want to make sure that things don't go unreported. Going back all the way back again, falling back to the 90s, the commission accepted the voluntary program that INPO proposed with industry's backing, but they also directed us to make sure we update the commission with issues that we found. And I think the good news is we haven't found issues of significance that we need to go back to them for. And so my recommendation is we keep doing what we're doing, nudge things up a little bit better, make a little bit more thorough description of events. And I think we'll be in good shape. And I think that's my last slide. Thanks very much.
So I'm actually going to see if our industry data folks can come and provide their presentation, and then we'll do a Q&A session for all of our operating experience data folks. So I'm looking for Gary DeMoss and Matt Deganish. The gentlemen want to kind of come on up, and then again, we will pause once we're done. You want to stand? Okay.
Keep myself awake.
All right. It's worth it. All right. And if you could just give us a sentence or two about yourselves to start out with.
All right, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Gary DeMoss, work for PSEG, and then also active as a deputy co-chair of IRIR. If you go to the next slide. So what is IRIR, just for people who don't know? It's called the Integrated Risk Informed Regulation Committee. Why we chose such a difficult to say name, I don't know. It provides a forum to allow our member utilities to work on issues that might maintain and improve plant safety, achieve higher reliability, share costs, and facilitate any interaction with the regulatory branches. The main thing is to do things once rather than have each plant do things alone. The IRIR leadership, you see Suzanne's here. She spoke already. She'll have more to say, I'm sure. Myself and Tony Magnan, who's probably on the line working with us. The technical and administrative support is provided by GE Vernova, and we try to work as closely as possible with the PWR Owners Group Risk Management Committee, because very few of our issues are actually BWR or PWR topics. So we are working together. Next slide. All right, the NRC is funded, as John just described, for many years. The INPO data, and the primary source for the INL data is the INPO ICIS data set, and they also consider LERs where applicable. Most events don't have an LER. INL data is widely used and is very valuable. Essentially, every plant in the U.S. uses the INL data as a prior for their to Bayesian update for their higher importance equipment, and using plant specific information along with the INL in the Bayesian process. We also use a lot of INL data for other PRA equipment where we do not collect individual data. If you look at anybody's database, you're going to see a lot of numbers come straight from INL, and there wouldn't be another source if INL didn't exist and didn't do this work. So I think I'll second John's statement that it's important. INL data is used to quantify SPAR models. That's important to us because we want SPAR models to be as realistic as possible. And many international plants also use the U.S. data from INL. So again, it's a valuable database. In IRIR, we started to realize that turbine-driven pump failure to run rates seemed really high. They kind of jumped up, and they were already high, and people just hadn't been seeing these failures. So we initiated a small project to take a look at these at this data that INL collected, and see what the problem is, and also see what the right numbers are for risk decisions. Looking at the INL data, and I didn't want to call out a specific piece of data because it would probably be proprietary to somebody, but we saw a lot of conservative calls that INL has to make. I'll give you a real simplified example of the kind of calls they make. The ICIS data will contain a statement like EDG alpha failed its 24-hour test due to, and then describe it and describe how they fixed it and all that stuff, which is really valuable to utilities and probably valuable at times to the NRC. But you see the word failed there. INL reads that word failed and lists that as a diesel failure to run. because it's at a 24-hour test. Well, many times the diesel could have and would have successfully responded to a real plant event, but it was good engineering practice to repair that diesel. Plants have looked at it, it's in their PRA database, and it would be in the PRA database as a non-failure. Some unavailability time would be associated with the repairs. It's hard to fault INL for that because they don't have the ability to contact utilities for this information, but we have it. So I think we can work with NRC and INL to get this data better. One of the things we need to do is to report it more clearly. The type of people doing this report tend to be work management type people, and it is a failure from their standpoint because they now have to schedule and execute a repair. They now have to reschedule the 24-hour surveillance test. That's failure stuff. So we just need to communicate better around the industry. That's not as simple as you think because a different group at every utility is responsible for this. They don't tend to have national organizations. So we're not sure how to get that done, but we do need to improve there. And that'll have to be a bottom-up thing that happens slowly. Move on to the next slide, please. So a couple years ago, we did a study, and we found a number of failure to run events that were not, quote, PRA failures. It was clear that the turbine-driven pump would have continued to run. And so unfortunately, we did this just after INL had created a set of priors. So it was going to be 5 years before we'd get any impact from this report. So we looked up INL's methodology for creating a prior, which is pretty clearly documented in their reports, and we made adjusted priors, and they're being used by the industry and accepted by the NRC in reactor oversight work and maybe in license amendment requests also. Considered that successful, but many said, well, that's not really broad enough, Gary. Let's go back several years later. Let's take a look at the BWR turbine-driven pumps, and let's expand our work to look at other key failures based on resources and what is driving risk. I mean, we need to be risk informed. We can't look at minor contributors. We decided to undertake a report this year that would include the EDG data, the PWR turbine-driven AFW pumps, and all common cause failure events that have been reported. The other thing this required is cooperation between the PWR and BWR owners group, which is a good thing. We need to do that better, and that's an industry problem, not an NRC issue. But so we collected that information. We reached out to the members, and the GE group that's working on that is in the process of wrapping that up into a report. That report will go to INL and NRC before the end of the year for their consideration in updating on in doing the next set of priors and updating the database. They probably won't accept everything we give them. That's okay. Anybody that's done PRA data or any other nuclear data, a lot of them fall in a fairly gray area. And we just have to live with that. It's a model reality. It's not reality, and we're all going to do our best there. So we're willing to keep working with you. John Lane out of the NRC and INL have been willing to work with us because they share the same goal. We don't want to put unrealistically high failure rates onto data. So we'll deliver this report later in the year, and hopefully it'll make INL's next data update better. And move on. I'm going fast here. So what are we learning by this? One, it's worth industry regularly looking at the INL data. It's important to all of us to get it out and get it right. We need to provide it in a timely manner so INL can use it and publish it because we don't want to get in the position of creating the priors and the data. That's not something the industry can, would, or should be doing. This is the NRC's job. It's important that the NRC knows where industry failure rates and the types of failures that are occurring is. So I know NRC need to continue to do this, and we need to continue to support them. Unfortunately, like for every good deed, more's asked of you, and people have been approaching me informally about doing more with relief valves. I mean, we'll pick up the common cause failures of BWR ADS and PWR pour relief valves, and but we're not going to be looking at the individual failure data. So they want to go a bit further there. People have been concerned about air compressors. Not sure how generic that is, and people have suggested maybe we should look at initiating events. I'm not sure if there's a problem or what to look at there, but those are just suggestions I've heard. Again, the key message is we need to do something like this probably just before the next 5-year INL data update. This is not a problem that INL created, the NRC created. It's part of this problem is created by the industry. We need to improve the clarity of these reports, and that will slowly improve the quality of the data used in PRA. I don't think anybody wants to put a PRA review in the chain of events going to release and reports to INPO. But I do see problems. I mean, specifically in our plants, we've there's a fairly short time frame after a event that you report it to INPO. Well, we've taken 6 months and longer to decide whether some failures are MSPI failures or not, and I don't think we update the INPO data on that. I think the INPO data stays wrong. And that's just one of the many problems that I think are out there. Another thing we're finding, we're working on the common cause events, and I'm not sure exactly where our event by event reviews are going to show up right now. I don't think it's as big as the failure to run events or the differences between us and INL that I'm speaking of. But we are seeing, as we see fewer and fewer actual full common cause events that are PRA common cause events, we're seeing a bigger and bigger effect from impact vector related events. That's I'll call them near misses of a common cause event. The common cause of PRA event has several characteristics. They have to be within the same PRA mission time, whether it's a standby mission time or running mission time. They have to be the same component and whatnot. Well, if they have some of those characteristics, INL gives what amounts to a fraction of a failure into the database, and that tends to drive the CCF alpha factors up a bit. That looks like that years ago that was a really good thing to do because it enabled that database to help NRC and industry look for CCF data out in the industry, and it also didn't have a huge effect on the parameters. Now we're using alpha factors as part of things like RICT and 5069, and then we're using alpha factors to show up big in SDP and ASP analyses. They're different beasts now than they were when they started to do these impact vectors. So I'm hoping those will get phased out. With that, I believe I'll turn it out for questions.
False. That's fake news. We're not going to questions right now.
We're not going to questions. Take that back.
We're gonna go ahead and let Matt give his presentation, and then we are going to open it up the floor to questions for Gary, John, and Matt all at the same time. So don't go far.
Okay. Hey everyone, I'm Matt DeGarnish. I'm a consulting PRA engineer at Vistra, supporting Beaver Valley. I'm here on behalf of the PWROG Owners Group. And in a former life, I worked for Westinghouse and was the primary author for the PWRG Flex Data analysis. And so I'm just going to briefly talk about that effort and where that effort is today. Next slide, please. So actually, in my haste, all these slides are titled history. So I guess we're doing a history lesson. But just a little bit of background to get us all back on the same page. But back in May of 2017, the NRC had released a memo talking about the need for improved guidance in crediting flex equipment and PRA models. That basically went through open areas such as data and HRA, but really denoted that more justification in those areas are needed, maybe some data, maybe some additional research. Conclusions 4 through 10 of that memo really talk about PRA data analysis, and one of the conclusions noted was that the staff recommended organizations provide operating experience for flex equipment so that it can be analyzed and incorporated into PRA models. So after a lot of discussions of people higher up than me, in early 2020, the owners group, the PWRG, decided to lead that effort for the industry. So it was to collect information related to flex equipment, analyze it similar to the permanently installed equipment data sets that INL does. Next slide, please. So the overall goal here, we had 5 main goals here. Develop failure rate parameters for flex equipment, but we wanted it to be in a structure basically like we have from INL. So we wanted to be able to use the data sources we had at site, so condition reports, other types of analysis for failure events. We wanted to be able to look at the industry experience and characterize it. We wanted to make sure that when we went through this effort, we could periodically update the data, right? So recognizing we could get a data set, do the analysis, it could be a snapshot in time, but we recognized there was an importance there to be able to continuously update that data to be realistic for our models. We did want to see through this effort if we could get any idea about the quality and effectiveness of our PM tasks for flex equipment, right? So maybe kind of a secondary position to like the actual data analysis and collection, but that, gave us our first kind of picture of what failure rates for flex equipment looked like as an industry. And then, of course, kind of along the lines of being able to periodically update the information, we wanted to make sure whatever we developed was easy enough to follow, and we could look for areas of improvement to ease that data collection process for future updates. So probably the main goals and most of the main goals for typical data analysis and collection for PRA. Next slide, please. So after some discussions with industry, we kind of landed on a common set of equipment that was being that the sites had and that would be valuable to develop failure rate data for. And it ended up being these 5 categories of equipment. So portable diesel generators, portable combustion turbine generators, portable diesel driven pumps, portable motor driven positive displacement pumps, and portable air compressors. We had a little bit back and forth. I think I mentioned on a slide, we had some audit through the NRC and INL where we kind of refined this list down. I think originally our effort was looking at various sizes of these, equipment. So, high voltage generators or different flow rates of pumps. But with some back and forth, we kind of condensed the data set to be what you see here. Next slide, please. So after all this work, determining what we were actually going to look at, we started the data collection efforts and the analysis efforts. So that original effort, we collected data from the sites up through 2019 at the time. Maybe I said we started in 2020, but 2018, 2019, we were looking at this effort. So as we were collecting this data, it was up through 2019. We have since then redone this effort and collected data through 2021. And there are future efforts planned to collect data through 2025 in place. So, we're continuing to look at the data. We're continuing to progress in doing updates to that data. The data analysis itself included, collection of failure data, estimation of success data, the classification of failures. We do a pooling analysis of the data. We look at a Bayesian update of that industry data with some non-informative priors, and we do a look at outliers. So very similar things, pretty straightforward for the analysis. So we did that whole effort the first time, and then we subjected the report to NRC and INL, who provided comments and feedback back to us, which we incorporated, revised, and sent back to the NRC for its formal approval. So the data sets that you see that are publicly available on Adams and through the NRC is that data set with the comments incorporated from the NRC. And I believe there's actually a section of that report, if I remember correctly, that goes through the audit questions and describes the dispositions to those comments from the NRC. Next slide, please. So this is the revision 1 data sets here. So this is what's out there. This was my filler slide, I think. So, you know, this is all things you can get here. I think it's been a while since I looked at the latest data sets. You can see comparisons if you look at the permanently installed equipment and how those failure rates compare to Flex. But you know, you can perform that effort yourself. But developed fail to run, fail to start rates for most of the equipment. You know, typical process, beta and gamma distributions for those. And then the methods we use are very similar to what's used for the permanently installed equipment. So empirical Bayes analyses or using a Jeffreys non-informative prior for the most part. Next slide, please. Okay, so I think this is my last slide. This is actually probably the only one that's not history. But as I mentioned, we're through the PWRG, and I keep saying PWRG, but we also reached out to the BWRG to collect information from the Bs. But we're continuing to do that effort. And as I mentioned, we had already updated the random failure data through 2021 and are going to be doing it through 2025. But some new things that have been done is we did an initial assessment of common cause for Flex in the last update, which we have, you know, the NRC has not reviewed. It was our first pass at doing that. So we were looking at, can we collect that data? How do we select a prior for the CCF groups for Flex? Kind of an initial draft there. We generate alpha factor parameter estimates for up to a group size of 4 for the various component types that we have. And it was, really the first shot at doing that. So as I mentioned, the NRC hasn't reviewed that. So the current NRC conclusion for that memo is that the currently available CCF parameters that INL develops are still what should be used. But there are talks, and there had been talks at the original audit that if we go ahead and do this process, we would, still like to get the NRC involved, allow them to review what we've done for the CCF analysis so that we're aligned with what methods are being used and the process to generate those values. That way, as we continue the data collection efforts, now we can update both, independent failure rates as well as CCF. So that's probably the latest development we have here. And, we're still having those discussions on how we interact with NRC and INL. But that, from the initial get-go, that has always been the plan, is to have that interaction back and forth. And I think that's all I have. So quick history review, quick status of where we're at.
And you already have a hand, but I'm going to remind folks that we can take questions for John, Gary, or Matt at this point. And if you do, please identify yourself, even if you've spoken before.
A couple of questions and comments. First for Gary. Totally agree about looking through the data and ensuring that failures are truly failures. I just want to know, just thinking about, just for example, say a diesel generator, you see sometimes either a lube oil leak or a fuel leak, and you kind of can make a determination, well, based on the size or whatnot, it wouldn't result in, sufficient bypass of fuel or whatnot. But I just wonder, do you think consistently across the board from licensees, they're also factoring in, could the leak have gotten worse, due to vibration or whatso, even within the PRA mission time? And do they consider other things like, could the spraying of fuel or oil potentially resulted in a fire hazard, that could have taken out the equipment, that kind of like, I don't know, almost secondary type of effect? Do you think that's kind of consistently, those considerations are taken into account, like when you're?
The short answer is yes, because when one of those type of events happens to some of the short list safety equipment, we pretty much expect that the region is going to be inspecting us, and maybe the SRAs are going to look into a possible SDP. The other portion of yes is we have to look at that to make a decision whether how we handle this event in our PRA database. Does that mean INL and the NRC are going to agree with us every time? No. Does that mean we have a scientific analysis of the possible changes in leak rate? No, that's a science project. We probably don't go. That's the gray area that exists. But just calling it conservative each time yields is more likely to yield I believe more likely to yield a bad answer than to yield a good answer.
Okay, thanks. Just a comment on the kind of impact vectors for the common cause failure. I've kind of read the draft EPRI report. I think we had an early copy on CCF, and so I kind of saw some of these type of comments or at least kind of recommendations or things that you guys are looking into. I understand the fact is, if you can truly say with 100% certainty that these, I call them partial CCF events, essentially any event that has a weighting factor of less than 1.0, if you can truly say that they would not result within in a common cause failure within a PRA mission time, I think yes, that's definitely going to result in overestimation. I think the coding process was trying to account for uncertainties. And I think the concern I would have in just eliminating that across the board is you would kind of go from potentially overestimating to potentially underestimating. Again, take that for whatever it's worth. And I've just a final kind of question. I've kind of heard for you, Matt, on Flex. Anecdotally, or I've kind of heard from some inspectors and whatnot, I think there's maybe concern that, are we getting the number of demands and tests, all the numbers of demands and tests within the Flex data? Yeah, we can audit the data, but the fact is that NRCs, there's no way else we could tell if you guys had tests. And just, I've heard, again, anecdotes of, the Flex generator didn't start because I had a battery issue, and they went and got a new battery, started it, and then there's no failure report. Now, I understand that's probably something that could be recoverable within an event, but at the same time, just calling it a non-failure or saying that's a success, I think is probably wrong. Can you kind of just speak to any of that, or?
Yeah, sure.
True.
Yeah, sure. On the success data counting, yeah, I mean, that was a main question as we were starting the data analysis itself is, we had an idea we could get failure events from our condition reports and, kind of do a review there. But a bigger question was, how do we estimate our success data? So, the majority of that estimation just comes from our, our scheduled PMs of the Flex equipment, right? With the expectation that if the plant has, more specific refined logs of that, those demands or tests, that, we're capturing those as well. But in general, the PM data served as a good starting point, right? Sometimes there's some questions on, well, how long is the equipment being run for those PMs? Is it 1 hour, 10 minutes? Are we trying to get that fine detail? But in general, the PM data was the starting point and refined from there if additional information was used. So I think that's kind of, to me, like probably the best approach. I don't really see that as a major issue in counting success data for the Flex equipment. In terms of things like failure events of equipment due to battery issues, right? We had a lot of discussion on that because of the same thing. It said, well, if we go out and the battery's degraded, you know, it's easy to go replace that battery, to jump that battery, you know, to get it working, to recover, you know, the equipment. And at least in our initial effort, and there's some very specific discussion in the report about that, is, you know, we usually see the condition report comes in that says, hey, battery was degraded, you know, XYZ was done. And those actually get counted, you know, at least initially as failures. Like if we see those degradations, we would count those, you know, conservatively as failures. There was a lot of discussion about, well, some sites have procedures, you know, to, you know, replace those batteries upon finding them, you know, degraded, or, you know, more procedurally directed guidance so that we could potentially credit recovery better. But we felt that was better handled individually, right? So if you have that information, you can have the data that says, well, here's your battery, you know, failure events that are being counted for equipment, and, you know, you could further go from there. But the initial position was, when we see these, we're going to count these as failures without additional information. So, you know, but we saw a lot of instances of interesting subjects that came up that deserve maybe a little bit more discussion than you would see for these permanently installed equipment. But yeah, that was definitely a consideration.
All right, I've got a hand. Barry, you should be able to unmute.
Okay, so I've got two questions now, unfortunately, and one suggestion. First question is for the operating experience. Is maintenance rule data used in any way, shape, or form? You know, as far as equipment unavailability or anything like that?
Yeah, well, could you repeat that, Barry? And is that directed towards any one of us or all of us?
Let's see here. Well, it's kind of under the operating experience one.
Well, it depends if you're asking NRC, if you're asking industry.
I am asking NRC if they use maintenance rule data in any way, shape, or form as input to equipment reliability.
Well, yes, the
Equipment
main,
performance.
basically the data collection program that INPO runs was one of the main drivers of that was the maintenance rule. And so prior to the maintenance rule, we basically had a much simpler system, NPRDS, that didn't have the level of detail that we really needed for PRAs. When the maintenance rule came around, everybody recognized that what we had up until that point wasn't going to be enough. And so that's when the NRC actually developed a data rule which was intended to require industry to provide the data that we would need in response to the maintenance rule and for PRAs both. Industry came back with a voluntary initiative which became EPICS at INPO. And so basically the answer, I think, to your question is that the maintenance rule drove the extension of the data collection effort and the sophistication of the effort itself from what it was previous to the maintenance rule to what it became subsequent to that. And it's been expanded and improved. It's gone from EPICS to ISIS to IRIS, and every implementation has expanded the capability. For instance, now I think to digital systems was one of the latest changes that they made with IRIS. So I think the answer is the maintenance rule did promote better data collection, and that then finds its way into all the PRAs.
The point is, I think you've answered it, but let me just say it again. So the maintenance rule data for availability is not accurate because it's only for maintenance. So you can have a pump that's broken for a year while you're waiting for parts. But don't shake your head. While you're waiting for parts, and then it doesn't get counted until it actually goes out of service. That was my experience at the plant I worked at.
That I would have to probably defer a little bit because I'm not sure how it would be recorded at the plant.
Yeah, I mean, I'll help you out a little bit there, John. No, the plant's required to record an unavailable unavailable piece of equipment while whether it's actually got a wrench on it or whether it's waiting for a part needed to fix it. It's no difference there.
Does that include balance of plant? I'm not quite sure.
Well, yeah, the maintenance rule doesn't reach very much into the balance of plant.
So but the PRA can rely on balance of plant equipment.
Right, and that ends up in the maintenance rule.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and table this and follow up later. Don't want to belabor the point. Then the suggestion I had is somebody said something about the maintenance type people are having difficulty, or the way they're reporting the data could be improved, but they're not sure how to do that. Perhaps a regulatory information summary, because the training folks already have this. They have an RAS that says, hey, voluntarily give us this data. So perhaps a similar IRS could be put out to improve the data.
Well, I think that, I mean, we haven't done anything to that extent at this point. I think what we're counting on really is the licensees to police their own reporting. I don't know that we've felt the need that it's so egregious that we needed to pursue it to any other great extent, but we always have encouraged licensees to provide the most exacting data that they can to us. But we haven't actually carried it beyond that recommendation.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Any other questions on our operating experience data topic? All right, thank you, gentlemen. Let's go ahead and shift then to external hazards activities. I'd like to invite Joe Kenny and Sunwoo Park. Oh, do I have a wrong? Oh, okay, sorry. I'm looking at the names I got. Whoever's talking about this, come on up. How's that?
All right. Wrong slide. Wrong presentation. You had the right one up. There we go. Okay. All right. Good afternoon. My name is Joe Canny. I'm a hydrologist in the Office of Research, and my colleague here
All right, can I get a thumbs up from someone if you can hear us? All right, cool. Thank you. Sorry about that. Everything stopped working on us. So we're working on bringing up the presentations now. Thank you for your patience. Okay, we're back. All right, I didn't say we were perfect. I said we were back. Yes. Okay, now do it just as good as you just did it.
Our flood hazard assessment research, the flooding guidance that's under development. Tim's going to talk about the POANI, the process for ongoing assessment of natural hazards information. Next slide. Next slide, please. There we go. Okay, I just have one slide, one kind of busy slide on our PFHA research. As I mentioned before, we've been working on this for several years now. We've done this in three phases. Essentially, the phase one is a technical basis phase, and here we worked mainly on looking at individual flooding processes, data, models, and methods for estimating these different processes. We looked at a bunch of different processes: climate, precipitation, different approaches for modeling flooding processes, particularly probabilistic approaches, obviously. We also did some work on the reliability of flood protection features and procedures. And we also developed something called the Natural Hazards Information Digest that we use to keep track of natural hazards information at all the operating plants. Tim's going to talk about an evolution of that digest that we use as the knowledge base for the POANI process. And we did not do this research in isolation. We had multiple partners from different federal agencies, some private contractors, academics, some international collaborators. And we presented a lot of this research in a series of public probabilistic flood hazard assessment research workshops over the years. Then when we finished with the technical basis research, we published probably about a dozen different reports, and there's still actually a couple more that are still just coming out of the publishing process right now. After the technical basis work, we devoted our attention to essentially 3 pilot studies of 3, flooding scenarios, which, are commonly occur. One is a local intense precipitation flooding, site scale flooding from heavy precipitation right at the plant, a riverine flooding scenario, and a coastal flooding scenario. The local intense precipitation, or LIP flooding, that work's complete. The riverine flooding is complete. The coastal flooding, it's still in progress. Basically, the report is still in review. And then the final phase is actually developing the PFHA guidance. I'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, so in terms of guidance, as with the research, the PFHA research was designed to, develop more risk-informed approaches for flooding, which is more appropriate for input into PRA. And we've also updated some of our existing guidance in order to improve realism and support more risk-informed assessment, even though some of the existing guidance is still mainly deterministic. Reg Guide 1.59, which is design basis floods for nuclear power plants. Reg Guide 1.256, which is guidance for assessing flooding hazards due to failures or incidents of water control structures, i.e. mainly dams. And those two guides, we've updated them, and we put them out for public comment over the last couple of years, and we're just putting the final touches on publishing both of these guides. They should be out in the next month or so. Red Guide 1.102, we're also updating that to incorporate a lot of lessons learned over the last several years, lessons learned during the post-Fukushima flooding reevaluations, for example. That's going to be on a bit longer timeline. That will probably be updated within the next year to year and a half. We're also working on new guidance, and this new guidance is specifically to address probabilistic flood hazard assessment. There's going to be sections in there on the treatment of uncertainty, and then more detailed method descriptions for local intense precipitation, riverine flooding, coastal flooding, and various associated effects like wind waves, for example. And this guidance, we're working on it right now, and our plan is to have a draft for public comment ready probably very early in the new year. And so I'm going to turn it over to Tim to talk about the Poani process now.
Thanks, Joe. So Poani, so interesting acronym. It's a process for ongoing assessment of natural hazard information. I didn't think I'd get that out, but I got the acronym right, I think. As far as I know, it's not a Hawaiian thing, but it's pronounced Poani. Anyway, partners, Office of Nuclear Reactor Regulation, Office of Nuclear Regulatory Research. What I want to focus on is this, this graph here, which I didn't make up. It's kind of interesting. It's kind of circular. We don't know why that is, but there's different parts to Poani. And the whole overview of Poani, by the way, is to basically take hazards and assess them and make it easier for licensees. So in other words, on the research side, we can look at all the different hazards, new information, and then be able to assess potential impacts to safety, then pass that along so the licensees don't have to. I think that's the whole premise of why Poani was developed. And you see the different parts of the process, including identification, screening, decision-making. And for decision-making, either you can have a regulatory action or no action. On the research side, we're more focused on identification and screening. Scope includes what Joe does, hydrology. I do meteorology, and I think a follow-up to our talk is geology and seismology. And I can speak to the meteorology. I've only been here for 10 months, but I can tell you that part of the challenge is trying to marry the meteorology to the nuclear applications. And that takes on a variety of spatial and temporal scales. So for example, you know, I've got experience both in large scale climate and also local weather. So you want to look at large scale climate, you want to look at trends. You want to look at something that I don't think is talked about too much. I'll only touch on briefly here, one of my interests in general variability. So things like El Nino, for instance, that could impact precipitation and temperature at specific sites. Those are large scale impacts. But then you have to tunnel down, you know, you go from these large scale impacts that impact regions, but from regions you have to get down then to the scale of the actual plants themselves. And hence that's part of the challenge. And also I'll include part of the research not only is in terms of weather and climate, but also dispersion. So looking at the local climate around the micrometeorology of the site itself. So there's a whole different variety of information you need to put in to help a nuclear site. What I'm going to discuss are three different components. Knowledge base, active technical engagement and coordination, I think is my favorite part, and assessment activities. Next slide, please. I'm repeating myself. There we go. Next slide, yeah. So knowledge base is the first one. So when we talk about looking at all this weather and climate information, all this external hazard information, we look at something called EHID, which, correct me if I'm wrong, Joe, it's a extension of what we used to call NHID. So Natural Hazard Information Digest, which transformed into External Hazards Information Digest. What this does, what I really like about this, and having worked with this just a little bit, is it links the weather and climate information and seismic, geological, flooding information, puts it into a tool that you're able to look at individual nuclear sites and be able to look at that information. And also includes human-related hazards, so including nearby transportation facilities and routes, nearby military and industrial facilities, and on-site storage facilities. So I view this as, first of all, linking all the science data to nuclear facilities. I mean, we'll point to a nuclear facility, here's your information. The other thing, which in my opinion, I think, is that this is always evolving, because my field is always evolving in itself. So for example, in my long history in weather and climate, the evolution of weather models, climate models, data sets, they've come such a long way. And with AI coming along, there's also another aspect that's also going to bring us forward even further. It's exciting times in terms of our field. Next slide, please. So here's where I have fun, because part of my experience, this is where you can talk about, I'm going to sort of speak of this in two different ways. In a positive way, efficiency, because when we're working in our fields, we don't work in a box. We work at other different players. So for example, in my experience, I used to work with a National Science Foundation grant that involved education, involved research, it involved agriculture. The great part about that is it inspires innovation. You see the other angle of a scientific problem, and you're able to come up with better solutions. That's the efficiency part. The challenge, though, is then, well, let's say your agriculture, your education, in this case, your industry, you're one of the federal partners, even the federal partners. I mean, I come from a NOAA background. Even NOAA's got so many different parts. We all speak different languages. So part of that is to be able to understand each part of what each one brings to the table and being able to bring that in. So having, this experience with the different parts of the science and bringing it into something understandable to solve the problem. But I think it's tremendous and a great opportunity to work with these different partners. So federal partners, industry stakeholders, professional societies, international counterparts. We just had a meeting with the Korean group, so with KINS and with KEIRI. I forget what these acronyms are, but the good thing about working internationally, you get to see what other facilities in other countries, what they deal with in terms of what their hazards are. So for example, you might be dealing with in Korea, it's storm surge. That's a big one. In this country, storm surge along the coast, tornadoes in the middle part of the country, and also for us too, we get tornadoes too, but especially the Midwest, and dealing with temperature extremes, all kinds of things. So the different aspects of the science are regionally dependent. Next slide. And finally come to assessment activities. So, for example, when I go into research, I like to tunnel in and really do a good job and be able to look at the literature, get an idea of what the problem really is. You aggregate the information, you talk to your partners, but then what you do is you aggregate it, and then you can go back and continue to aggregate, and it's a continuous process. It's very dynamic. And so it's performed by NRC subject matter experts. The subject matter experts aggregate the information with previously collected information. So it's building blocks. You have a foundation you come here with, and you build on that. Evaluate the change in the hazard. This is the important part for the nuclear application, presented by aggregated information. You do a limited scope quantitative or qualitative initial screening and consider available risk insights to determine whether the change in the hazard has a potential significant effect on plant safety. That's the bottom line of why we're here. And so for some examples of recent ongoing assessment activities, in the seismic world, it's NGA. This stands for Next Generation Attenuation. And this is where I did a little reading on NGA before I started this talk. And I really like what it does in terms of it takes science and then brings it to the nuclear applications, and then you can apply it to PRA. So in this case, you're looking at ground motion models and how, you're developing new ground motion models, and you're looking at earthquakes in the Midwest and the East Coast. And yes, we do get them. I lived in St. Louis for a while. We had a big one about 15 years ago. So trust me, it can be a problem. But with these different models, you can then put these into the PRAs and get better PRAs out of it. And then GAO audit response, this is more on the climate side. So this is where GAO was talked about being able to, NRC to incorporate model projections, climate model projections into the data. So for example, looking at trends in extreme weather, precipitation, temperature, and that's an ongoing process. So you want more information, there's a link, and I think we're done. I don't think we're taking questions now, are we?
Yeah, I'm not going to take questions now. I'm
About
gonna
the process.
invite Sun Woo up to speak about seismic. But don't go far.
No, I'll be right. I won't go anywhere. So I'll drop all my stuff there. So,
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Sono Park, and I'm a reliability and risk analyst at the NRL, DRA, and FPLC, which is a PRA licensing branch C. So today I'm going to talk about realism in seismic PRA. Next slide, please. Okay, just a second. So we will walk through why seismic PRA realism matters and the challenges it poses, and how realism in seismic PRA can be enhanced in the areas of seismic hazard characterization, fragility analysis, and the systems and consequence analysis. Next slide, please. Okay, so why seismic PRA realism matters? Balance the risk profile. The goal is to prevent seismic risk from appearing overstated compared to other hazards like internal events of fire or flooding, simply because seismic risk models are overly conservative and supports licensing and oversight. Realistic results provide a credible inputs that strengthen risk-informed decision-making in licensing and oversight. Better prioritization. Realism helps identify truly risk-significant SSCs and seismic vulnerabilities rather than spending time on the marginal issues. And enhance the credibility. Realism increases the confidence both within the NRC and with the public that seismic safety is being addressed in a realistic way. Next slide, please. Okay, despite the clear benefits, there are challenges in achieving realism in seismic PRA. Rare but potentially catastrophic events. Some seismic events are rare, but they can be catastrophic. And the limited operating experience makes it difficult to calibrate seismic models. And the large epistemic uncertainties. Hazard and the fragility estimates rely heavily on limited data, and therefore on the expert judgments, which introduces significant epistemic uncertainties into the PRA. Significant correlated effects. A single earthquake does not simply damage one thing. Rather, it can simultaneously challenge multiple SSCs across the entire plant. And the accurate modeling of these correlated effects can be quite complex. high regulatory impact because the seismic PRA results often drive licensing decisions. Realism is essential to avoid outcomes that are overly conservative or overly optimistic. Particularly, small modular reactors seem to have a very high seismic risk compared to internal events and other hazards. Next slide, please. Now let's explore how realism in seismic PRA can be enhanced, starting with hazard characterization. Apply advanced PSHA, probabilistic seismic hazard analysis. This involves using robust check processes or senior seismic hazard analysis committee processes that leverage multiple expert models and structured logic trees for systematic treatment of uncertainty. Adopt modern ground motion models. Updated ground motion models, such as the NJ East, provides improved seismic hazard estimates based on a much larger database of ground motion recordings. Just a second, please. Let me. Recordings than previous models. Site-specific studies. Site-specific seismological and geotechnical studies provide more accurate results than relying on regional or generic data. And update with new data. Periodic updates of the hazard models will ensure that the latest seismic monitoring and advances in seismology are properly reflected. Next one, please. Okay. As an example, here is how Puani has been applied to update the seismic hazard information. The Puani process was explained in detail just now by Tim and Joe. Thank you for that. The NRC has updated seismic hazard characterization using Central and Eastern U.S. seismic source characterization, NJ East ground motion model. Tim explained that a bit. And updated seismic site response analysis and the latest geologic site profiles. Here, the bolded items highlight the key contributors to the Puani seismic hazard updates. Now, industry and the NRC staff may use the updated seismic hazards in licensing applications and safety evaluations. For example, in case one, the updated seismic hazard data enabled a licensee to apply EPRI's Tier 1 alternative seismic approach, for those who know about it, in its 10 CFR 5069 license amendment request, rather than Tier 2 under the previous hazard data, thereby reducing the burden associated with addressing seismic risk in the 5069 categorization process. In another case, the updated hazard data led to a reduction in seismic core damage frequency. Of course, it should be noted that these two cases drawn from different operating plans simply illustrate how updated hazard data can influence licensing applications and safety evaluations. And the observed trend cannot be generalized to all plans. Actually, in some cases, the new hazard may exceed the previous estimates, leading to increased seismic risk. Next slide, please. Now let's move on to fragility analysis, another critical area for realism in seismic PRA. Develop plant-specific fragilities. Using as-built data, walkdowns, and plant configuration details provide a more realistic fragility estimates than simply relying on generic data. Consider nonlinear soil structure interaction models. Soil structure interaction analysis plays an important role in fragility analysis. And the user linear models can be overly conservative. And the nonlinear models can provide a more realistic response of the plant, especially under beyond the design basis earthquake ground motions. Use updated test data. Using results from shake table and the component qualification testing can improve the credibility of fragility curves. Regularly update with operating experience. Insights from actual earthquake performance at nuclear or non-nuclear compatible industrial facilities around the world would help refine fragility models. Next slide, please. Think the next one. Yeah. Yes. Here is an example of how plant level fragilities have been updated in practice. NRC generic issue GI 199 provides plant level fragility data for operating reactors, including the plant level Hickley values, based largely on IPEEE results. And some of these values are considered unrealistically conservative, particularly for those plants that underwent a reduced scope seismic margin assessment, SMA. And now several licenses have increased the plant level, plant level Hickley values to support their risk-informed license amendment request, such as TST 505 and 10 CFR 5069. And some plants enhanced their plant level Hickley capacity in proportion to the ratio of the safe shutdown earthquake to ground motion response spectrum over the 1 to 10 hertz frequency range. Because this ratio serves as an indicator of a seismic margin, with the SSE representing capacity and the GMRS representing demand. And another example involves a plant that enhanced its Hickley capacity by upgrading its IPEEE reduced scope SMA to a focused scope SMA. A reduced scope SMA is not sufficient to provide the information necessary to establish the plant level Hickley, because it offers only limited screening level insights. But a focused scope or full scope SMA produces information necessary to determine the plant level Hickley value. Next slide, please. Now let's consider how systems analysis can be improved to support realism. A model correlated failures realistically. Instead of assuming extreme 0% or 100% correlation between component failures, physics-based correlations that reflect the actual likelihood of a simultaneous failure can be used. Treat uncertainty explicitly. This means separating aleatory randomness from epistemic uncertainty, and propagating both through the analysis to produce more realistic risk estimates. And credit non-safety and flex equipment realistically. After the Fukushima accident, operating plants installed the flex equipment as a backup. A realistic PRA needs to correctly model the true availability and the limitations of this equipment without either undercrediting its value or overestimating its reliability. Integrate HRA under seismic conditions. This involves accounting for the stressors that operators would face, such as the degraded environment and the aftershocks, and increased operator workload and the realistic operator response times. Next one, please. So wrapping up with the conclusion, seismic PRA is a key contributor to overall plant risk, and the balanced realism in seismic PRA is essential. If a too conservative, seismic risk may be overstated. If too optimistic, vulnerabilities may be overlooked. Thank you. I'll be happy to take any questions.
All right, so actually we're gonna hold off on questions.
Okay.
We're scheduled to take a 15-minute break, so let's get up, stretch your legs, get some caffeine, whatever you need. We'll come back and finish up our external hazards activities with a presentation from EPRI, and then we'll take questions for all of our external hazards presenters. So I've got about 3:05, so let's start back again by 3:20. if you're there, so you can begin your presentation.
I'm here.
And just-
Can you hear me okay?
Yep. We got you.
All right.
We can hear you. Give us a
All right.
second. Michelle's bringing up the slides. And people are still finding their seats here. All right. You want to go ahead and let us know who you are and go ahead with your presentation.
Sure. Thank you very much. And so I'm Fernando Ferrante. I'm the manager of the risk group here at PRA. I've been with PRA for 8 years, and I was a member of the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission 8 years prior to that. I apologize for not being in person. I got a nasty case of influenza type A. And so I risk informed my presence at the workshop, and I didn't want to expose any of you to this nasty bug. And I also apologize in advance for my voice not being 100%. All right, with that, I'm going to talk a little bit about external hazards with regards to PRA realism in line with the prior presenters and also the presentations since the beginning of the day. So next slide. So first, a couple of thoughts. Just like Doug True, Kevin Coyne, and others, I think the word or the term PRA realism bears, providing some context, right? And so if we're looking at a external hazard model that is developed, as Sun Woo just presented, there's multiple parts to which we can kind of discuss realism and how to improve it, right? As was mentioned for seismic, the hazard is a big contributor in terms of uncertainty. It is a challenging area for sure. As mentioned, the record and extrapolation of some of the more extreme low frequency scenarios can be challenging. And this can be a challenge both in terms of over-conservatism and potential under-conservatisms, as we've seen at Fukushima, for example. It is a challenging process and also a process that can be costly, but it is a critical input in terms of getting the mean hazard, as well as, the center, body, and range as discussed, for example, in the seismic expert assessment discussed previously. Then there's probabilities that go into the failures of the structural systems of components, SSCs, making sure we understand the response and making sure we understand the credit for the human side of the response, as well as characterizing the uncertainty is still critical. And then there's the overall integration of all this information into a logic model, right? We're understanding how the plant performs, again, understanding the response of the humans, understanding the impacts of the procedures, and so much that goes into the response and protection against these hazards is critical to it. I learned something interesting from one of the staff here, Mark Wishart, who said that both deterministic and probabilistic applications have uncertainty, but PRA is honest about it at least. And so we cannot escape uncertainty, and that means that realism itself is a term that has to be taken carefully. So where does it matter? When we perform the models and then have them peer reviewed for quality, there is an understandable focus on the dominant risk contributors, which is really what I think we want to get at with realism, right? Is the risk profile reasonable? Is it accurate with the plant as designed, as operated? Does it account for things that may impact that knowledge, that may cause uncertainty? And uncertainty here, I mean in terms of confidence of information more so than distributions and technical details. Do we understand that conservatism, while it sounds good for maybe some points of view, it is a problem that can mask ultimately the actual realism of it. And if we're not focused on the right or most dominant contributors, then I think it is a question of challenging the realism of what we're trying to do. Next slide. And so the other aspect I think that is important to bring up and some of it was discussed in the seismic presentation, is that the information changes, right? The planning process, the seismic hazard characterization, all of those can be passive for changes, new insights, such as the one in 2011, and not just the event in Japan, but even the Central Virginia earthquake, providing new information. And so understanding how those changes inform the realism of what we have is a continuous effort. And again, it is, I think the risk assessment is an area that provides a process, a structured process to look at some of these implications in a way that, if done appropriately, provides insights and ultimately helps with plant safety. The models are really useful in terms of understanding the changes of the hazard, understanding whether we have cliff edge effects, understanding whether the contributors change, and there is a different priority in terms of what is now driving the risk and what can the plant do, if anything, and the basis for which a change might be required. One licensee that has worked with APRI recently looked at all the information in detail, leveraged some guidance that APRI created in terms of maintenance. And one of the outcomes, which does not mean there isn't there's no realism or is not an outcome that should be inspected, is in some cases the changes are not significant. And that by itself is a powerful insight if one can understand and use a tool that is justified and has a proper level of credibility. Next slide. And so one of the things I'm going to try to do relatively quick here because of the time is go through what some of the different hazards and different issues impacting external events bring in terms of realism or unrealism, if I can use a word. My goal is not to try to kind of cover the research we're doing and all the products that we might have, but try to focus on the theme of the workshop in terms of what can impact the insights. And again, in terms of the context of PRA realism being having a good decision, a decision that is informed and is realistic, not predictive, because that is not the point of these models, but a tool that today can help us understand whether the safety position that we have is appropriate and can withstand some of the aspects of what can happen tomorrow that may bring things that we haven't necessarily considered fully, which doesn't mean necessarily that there is lack of safety. So I'm going to cover some of these topics relatively quickly, and then I'm willing to answer in more detail if need be. Next slide. So I wanted to start with high winds a little bit, just to highlight, similar to what was done in seismic, areas where there's improvements, right? And so some of the challenges, and there's products listed on the left side from APRI, when one starts developing new analysis, it is understandable to be conservative. I think that is not necessarily bad posture. And I don't mean that it's always conservative. Sometimes the information indicates there may be a lack of conservatism. But initially, when one models information or phenomena that one is less familiar with, one can start with a conservative basis and then continue to refine. And so one of the challenges in her win is, assuming, for example, a loop, which stands for loss of outside power, always occurs, is conservative. I mean, it can happen with extreme high winds events. It doesn't necessarily happen 100%. And the question is how to develop a realistic basis that can be defended for a number that is not a 0, is not 1. Assuming, that just because certain wind speeds are exceeded, all SSE fails, again, that will be unrealistic, but one needs to have a basis for the design, the level of protection, and then things like missiles being generated, impacts, the probability of certain components being impacted, secondary effects, and potentially a large number of combinations that can include, for high winds, flooding, rain phenomena, and so forth. Advanced warning is another challenge for realism. It is understandable that for a lot of phenomena, there will be some advanced warning. And again, this is not to say that by itself means there will be no impact whatsoever if one sees the phenomena or the event coming, but how to credit that, how to develop the rationale for the decision making, and how to include all of that in a realistic basis is part of the challenge. So next slide. So going relatively quickly through this. So on the loss of oversight power, for example, work was done to develop a basis for when and how can it be credited. The specific report listed here looked at the data, which is scarce, as discussed in previous presentations. And so one needs to be aware that the data set cannot be parsed too much. Otherwise, the uncertainty becomes very high and information is very limited. The binning of what speeds will cause loss of offsite power, the recovery of when offsite power can be brought back after a loss, and which time window, as was discussed for the level 3 PRA project, is credible to discuss, is something that is provided. And so this report literally discusses the effort in terms of adding realism. What is the basis for wind speeds where recovery may be more or less likely? And the study clearly shows that if one parses the data in a way that might be inappropriate or doesn't do a statistical analysis of sufficient rigor, one can either be under conservative or over conservative for different wind speeds. A realistic outcome is that wind speeds of lower intensity are going to hinder recovery a little bit less than speeds of high intensity. And in the case of the report, 165 miles per hour was used as a dividing metric to identify different recovery curves. Next slide. And so another area is the secondary effects, right? And so one of the things that does happen in this phenomena is multiple potential impacts due to different phenomena within, a single event. And so as discussed, for example, in the Dwayne Arlo event with debris, one can have a storm of some magnitude that brings, either rain, extreme precipitation, or hail, or other aspects that come into the picture. And so one of the efforts, for example, to address wind-driven rain is to look at what is really focusing on the realism of it, which is, if there is an event, a high wind event, a hurricane or a tornado, and rain is, common in many of those events, so there's a dependency. How does one account for wind driven rain that causes an effect on the plant? And so the idea presented here in this report to add to the realism is essentially to say, is a component fail because of high wind to the extent that the rain itself is not going to change that failure? If there is a structure that does not fail, but openings are created such that the rain enters the facility and equipment inside is now exposed to the rain, when we will assume that it will be successful, then how do we credit that? And then finally, developing a basis for a conditional probability to be provided is another aspect of trying to add realism. And so will high winds and rain happen 100% of the time? Will the rain impact equipment that is not fail 100% of the time? Those are levels of unrealism that one tries to, avoid and improve as one goes through the analysis. And the idea is, again, that the point is not to try to develop the models with 100% precision, but is to understand where the model may be missing a key insight, such as wind-driven rain could be the phenomena that actually causes a failure. And if that's missing the PRA, then the PRA will be unrealistically under-conservative. And so doing that in a graded approach is one way to try to bring the realism, not in the sense of creating a model that is complex and has everything perfect about it, which is impossible, but that it captures the right risk insights, is not missing something important. Next slide. And so the other aspect of this is, as I mentioned, the generation of tornado missiles. And so hurricanes, tornadoes have the capability to pick large objects and essentially inject them into a wind stream, and then fundamentally cause impact to structures, systems, and components. And so challenging area for realism. If you have a field of objects spread at plants, if you have a maintenance shed, if you have a certain arrangement of the site with different elevations, all of those can cause realism to be challenged one way or another. And so assuming all objects are going to be picked up and injected into the highest speed velocity and impact every single object and fail every single component is clearly not realistic. But providing the basis in a way that one can actually model this without becoming an overly complicated problem is part of the challenge to include that. So in work that EPRI did in partnership with industry, tools were developed to try to create a basis for which a reasonable assessment is provided, which does not mean, does not preclude a conservative assumption in cases where impacts may not necessarily drive the risk for a particular failure. Next slide. The other final aspect of high winds is the issues such as impact of particular components. And so one of the things that can happen in high winds is a missile impacts a stack, blocks it, crimps it essentially. And then if that stack is relied upon for exhaust, for example, for a diesel generator, it could cause a failure of that component. And so this gets to the most advanced level of realism. And again, the intent is not to say that all of these things need to be done to a great level of refinement, but the greater approach at which, if one assumes or has to assume or consider the fact that a missile can crimp, stack, or some other structure or system or component that could fail critical equipment, how far and how refined and how justifiable is it? And so approaches are provided in the case of this research to try to show when and how one can develop a basis for consideration of the probability of failure. If assuming 100% failure is not just unrealistic, but ultimately drives the risk in a way that is not representative of the plan. Next slide. And so, all this guidance is wrapped up into overarching high winds guidance for PRA. And this is one approach to deal with high winds, of course. I think the realistic part of trying to address a hazard such as this is make sure that the site, the location, and the hazards for high winds, which can vary from tornado to hurricane to straight winds, for example, are ultimately properly represented. That the loss of offsite power loop is characterized appropriately at the level of wind speeds that will cause it. Recovery is considered. And the avoidance of unrealism, as I mentioned earlier, is one can easily assume conservative assumptions. And to be fair, one can also have issues such as the ones that were mentioned earlier, debris that is not easily modeled. And so realism can definitely cut both ways. And the graded approach to model it is something that depends on how the decision needs to be informed, how much detail is needed, and how much certain levels of conservatism or refinement impact the decision. Next slide. And so to move to a different hazard, I'll talk a little bit about external flooding, reflecting a little bit of the BFHA work that Joe Kenny presented. And so again, slew of guidance, a slew of documents trying to address multiple parts of realism. So next slide. External flooding is an area that does bring some challenges, and I think Joe indicated some of them. A challenge can be a lack of realism in characterizing the stream flood frequencies. To be clear, I'm not saying that one cannot characterize it, or one can definitely do uncertainty analysis and use certain techniques to address this issue. But in comparison with seismic, which has gone through some level of maturity and the probabilistic seismic hazard assessment, that is now is capable of characterizing extreme levels of acceleration due to earthquakes. Some of the phenomena we deal with in external flooding still present some challenges. There are certain limitations in terms of how far, say, into 1 in 10,000 or 1 in 100,000 and beyond in terms of characterizing the floods. There is a very large variation in terms of which phenomena impacts which parts of the country or regions or, apologize. And so it is an area where one needs to be careful in terms of how do we characterize the fact that one region will have certain phenomena. That phenomena may be combined with different types of impacts, and different regions can have other types of phenomena. And so typically in a lot of areas of application on external flooding PRA, there is a lot of screening in terms of identifying whether the side grade is above some of the most extreme characterizations of the types of events, flooding events that can happen. And so that leads, at least in PRA, with the fragilities, the spatial effects, and other challenges in characterizing those aspects, to a lower level of practice at least in the state of practice of external flooding PRA, which is not to say that one shouldn't continue to improve the realism and consider. It's just that these are challenges that exist, and it's highlighting that for certain hazards, the realism may be different. The aspects we want to target for improvement may also be different, and it's an ongoing aspect of research. Next slide. And so this slide really just covers general methodology provided in tandem with EDF, Electricité de France, the utility in France, and trying to address some of these, trying to provide, again, a graded approach that addresses some phenomena. As Joe Ken indicated, there's all kinds of different external flooding mechanisms, and recognizing that the guidance will work for some, and for others, it might be more of a challenge, and therefore an ongoing level of improvement of realism that needs to be undertaken. Also, guidance on walkdown. I think sometimes there's an over-focus on trying to go into the PRA model and put quantification, but doing a good walkdown, including to assess the risk of the plant, is almost as critical in terms of identifying physically and recognizing areas where different phenomena may impact, and maybe adding barriers, maybe considering the timelines for impacts, and therefore being aware, building that awareness, which is part of understanding realistically how the plants can perform under certain extreme conditions. Next slide. And so in terms of the pieces of external flooding, again, characterizing the phenomena on the left side, making sure, being realistic there is making sure the mechanisms that can impact the site are well understood. What are those impacts? In some cases, it is not at the plant grade level, everything's flooded, but potentially equipment that can be impacted starting at lower elevations, and therefore more likely potential flood events. What type of barriers can work? If barriers have to be moved, the realism of crediting how those actions are taken under an extreme event, and the level of margins that can be assessed in terms of could they be eroded by certain phenomena. Unrealism in terms of at least, looking at the fragility first, as I mentioned, looking at the credibility of some of those barriers and the potential for coexisting hazards that can impact. And so unrealism will be, trying to model every hazard in terms of external flooding, or every mechanism, I should say, in ways that doesn't really help understand the insides. In other words, assuming elevations that are extreme, flooding everything, and ultimately getting no other insight, then there will be a point where an extreme, unrealistic event will flood the site without any indication of the realism or potential actions that one can take that are actually more informative of trying to address the conservatisms or lack of full understanding and characterization of some of these flooding mechanisms. Next slide. So next, I'll quickly talk about a couple of other issues that tend to impact, I think, external hazards and with respect to the issue of realism. So, there's a lot of natural phenomena, and sites around the world are located where they can be exposed to very different types. There's also combinations. It is absolutely observed that some of this phenomena bring different types of mechanisms that can impact the site. And so the combination aspect, screening, in the sense of identifying those that are more important, those that are not physically reasonable to assume, and doing that in a way that is justified, neither over-conservatively and none under-conservatively. And so how does one address this without creating an insane amount of paperwork, and then potentially creating a situation where one can always ask, what about this phenomena with this phenomena with this phenomena, right? And so addressing those important dependencies, the site-specific characteristics, but also making sure that the analysis is realistic and practicable, as Kevin Coyne used from the federal government dictionary, so well put. So next slide. And so one of the ways to do this is to make sure that a screening approach is tries to, has a level of completeness that is as sufficient as possible, includes, knowledge of events such as Fukushima Daiichi and beyond, lower events that didn't necessarily go to core damage, and apply and continue to reassess the applicability, the completeness, and the level of practicality in terms of implementing it. Next slide. And so the screening is one level. Then the other level is making sure that ultimately that screening approach has been tested. And so it is not about just picking a few, potential mechanisms and try to get rid of them. It is looking at a basis for what exists in the hazards, looking at a basis for, how well tested it is. The design basis events, to some extent, can inform this, recognizing that they can be very conservative, and then looking at information such as the European stress tests that were done after 2011 to make sure that the information is as complete as possible. Combined events, it tends to be a little bit of a challenge, especially if one tries to characterize everything probabilistically. And so focusing on the functions that a particular event impacts. So for example, a storm that has winds, but also lightning, and hail or some other phenomena, what functions specifically at the site are impacted, right? And so a lot of that phenomena can impact the switchyard, equipment, components, and structures that are located outside. So beginning to understand which functions are impacted, the types of capabilities in protecting or mitigating that are available, and then developing an understanding of it sometimes can indicate that that combination either has been covered by the risk profile or is a small sliver of what's already there. And again, the intent is not to, emphasize the potential combinations. It is to include it, but it's also trying to recognize that modeling every single combination, especially as you include 2, 3, 4, 5 different mechanisms, becomes an exercise a little bit in futility. Next slide. And so this just kind of highlights, I think, what I said in terms of realism for combined hazards, trying to make sure that there is a level of understanding. So let's go ahead and skip to the next slide. So next, I want to talk a little bit about climate impacts. And so, this is something that it's there to deal with, not strictly in our opinion, a PRA modeling issue per se, but an issue where it can question, for example, the type, the intensity of certain events, the changes that some of the climate global impacts may introduce, and how to assess that within a risk assessment environment, not just a PRA model. And here realism, again, goes back to decision making more so than just PRA numbers. How can we understand with the uncertainty in the information that is part of what climate change includes? How do we understand if a hazard can change, if that hazard can change significantly to the point of causing a safety impact, the type of exposures, because this now brings everything together. Some sites are in places where extreme cold events will become lesser. Some other sites are in places where warmer events and droughts, for example, have challenged plants around the world, can become an issue. And so how to identify what is the vulnerability, what is the response, how do you make a decision that is not just on an equipment today or tomorrow or for the next outage operational space, but in 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. So realism in using a word in this particular topic is another thing that is challenging, because one does want to account for the impacts, understand the exposure the plants might have, and have a proper foundation for when to make decisions to enhance the robustness or find solutions that can avoid some of the challenges that such phenomena can create, and make a sound risk assessment, which I think is really what the goal of saying realism is. Next slide.
Hey, Fernando,
Yes.
if you could wrap it up in the next like 2-3 minutes or so, we still need to allow time for Q&A.
Absolutely. And so I think I already covered this topic. Let's go to the next slide. I want to get into seismic, and I can be done in a few minutes. And so I don't think we need to repeat an awful lot. I think some will already cover very well some of the challenges in seismic and the details here. Let's go to the next slide. I want to focus on how one improves the realism, right? And so one of the things that seismic or external hazards, to be honest, in general, can impact is, how do we look at when we make risk-informed applications? And by that, I mean, when we do certain programs such as 10 CFR 5069, which stands for the Risk-Informed Categorization SSC, which is a program where risk information along with deterministic information can be used to characterize SSCs of more or less significant, and therefore allow for a graded treatment. And so one question that did come up is, does seismic add any different insights compared to internal vents or internal fire, internal flood? And so work was done to look into this issue, and some did mention some topics such as seismically correlated failures and other activities. And so an important insight on some of these activities is identify where hazards such as seismic or even external flooding or high winds, if to extrapolate beyond seismic, add insights. And so for an application where an SSC is already identified to be important in one hazard, say internal events, if seismic identifies the same SSC, it's not that the insight, is meaningless. It's indicating that that is an important SSC, but it doesn't necessarily change the decision making. And so what's important is to know where is the difference and when can seismic indicate an SSC that was considered low safety significant, that could be high safety significant if seismic does prove to be a big contributor. And so that's one example. The other example is the risk-informed technical specifications, more specifically risk-informed completion times. And so in that area, there's a penalty that is used if the seismic PRA results are not used. And again, level of conservatism's realism speaking when we're kind of using factors to address whether the impact of a hazard may be significant or not is another area when one can improve the realism, and doing so requires doing effort and making sure there is an appropriate basis. Next slide. And I believe I'm done after this one. Okay, and so this talks about the changes in information, which some will already kind of discuss. You know, seismic information has been changing as in pretty much since forever and will continue to change. And so this slide just discusses some of the recent changes and how the realism itself can be challenged, right? When new information comes up, is it realistic? Does it need to be included in the model right away? Is a change in information automatically a increase in risk or an impact on safety? How does one address something that we need to live with because the science continues to evolve? So next slide should be the last slide, highlighting, you know, that we do have the challenge that was mentioned by the NRC colleague, the partial fragility correlation, when, how, on what basis to justify something other than zero, you know, always happens or doesn't happen. And then another issue, which, you know, was also highlighted, I think Chris Hunter mentioned, you know, are we fully using the information that we have from the risk models, right? We put uncertainty, particularly in seismic, but one can say in external hazards. Do we really do a lot with it? Are we really looking at what the uncertainty information says? And can we translate that into actionable terms? Is another challenge that I think is there. And so I won't cover the bottom, but I want to end there in terms of highlighting the overall, I think, challenges in external hazards so we can have some time for questions. All right, thank you.
All right, so let's go ahead and open the floor to any questions on external hazards activities, either for Fernando or for any of our NRC speakers. Again, if you are interested in answering or asking a question in the room, please raise your hand. Looks like we've got a couple hands up. I'm going to go ahead and go to Rick Grantham, just because, sorry, Barry, but you've been asking a lot of questions and I want to give Rick a chance to ask one. So, Rick, you should be able to unmute.
Yeah, I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, real good. Appreciate your discussion, Fernando, particularly on the PRA realism in the green and the other aspects. I think we should probably have done that for everything, including fire as well. And it's a big mistake that we've made because then, in a sense, you know, you end up with multiple PRA models, one for external events, one for internal events, one for fire, one for flood, and it's not conducive for applications. What I'm curious, though, is I haven't heard the NRC say anything about the conservatism so far, and maybe I missed it, of the assumptions and some of the ones that Fernando brought up, but others, you know, in a sense, you know, the fact that we have to assume a LOCA for a seismic event. That to me is something that depends on the size of the earthquake. So I'd like to hear the NRC talk about, are they looking at the assumptions that generally put us in the conservative bucket to begin with, and then we start looking at other, you know, refinements and analysis methods and that type of thing. That's a question for the NRC.
Yeah, anyone want to nibble on that one from the NRC?
If not, I would say that's a little bit of a gap that we should probably look at.
All right, we'll take that as a comment.
Yeah. That's all. Thank you.
All right, I've got one more hand. Give me a second to navigate through it. Oh, Barry, you can go ahead and unmute. Sorry, you already have the ability to activate your mic.
All right, so there's a question for Fernando. What is the relationship between the EPRI tornado missile program used in Chapter 3 analysis and this tornado missile strike calculator? Does one supersede the other, or?
Yeah, I think let me make sure I fully understand your question. Are you mentioning Frick Tormes, which is a a code approved by the NRC?
Yes.
Yeah, and so EPRI was actually the develop of both tools, Tormis back in the 70s. And so Tormis is still available out there. It is approved by the NRC. It is a very refined tool with a high level of complexity. And so TMSC uses the basis that Tormis ultimately also used to develop the analysis that is contained in the program. But TMSC allows for a little bit more of a transparent understanding of what's inside, and then using it in a way where the user can either include a lot of detail, include less detail. And so TMSC, excuse me, is a tool that we developed more recently to allow a little bit more of practicality and control within what utilities may want to do in terms of the level of detail. Tormis is out there and it's very detailed. It is used in several high wind PRA plants use it. And so there is a relationship between the two. And TMSC is a tool that we created to provide a little bit more options in terms of the details and level of use and control by the user, the utilities, in how they model it. And so that's at a basic level. There's more details, of course, but at a basic level, that's kind of the relationship between those tools.
Thank you. That answers my question.
Thank you.
All right, one last question from Ed Lyman. Ed, you should be able to unmute.
Yeah, thanks. Ed Lyman from UCS. So question for Mr. Park. You talked about the need to consider flex realistically in the context of seismic PRA. But I guess my question is, how do you really do that? And I'm not just talking about the availability of the equipment, but the success paths for actually setting it up and operating it. And that seems to be possibly an uncertainty that possibly can never be, acceptably reduced unless you have some sort of, extensive validation of the ability of the operators to carry out the necessary actions under potentially severe conditions following a seismic event. So what is the thinking now about how to do that? Because I think Flex is getting credit in seismic PRAs that may not be appropriate. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, I understand, there is a discussion about the reliability of Plex equipment, particularly because of a lack of the data, performance data. It is difficult to set the probability of a failure for the Plex equipment, and so I don't know the solution, but during our license amendment request review, there is a discussion, and we try to make it as realistic as possible, not too conservative and also not too optimistic. But again, the challenge is the availability of limited data. Maybe that's not very satisfactory to you, but that's where we stand right now.
Okay. Thank you to all our speakers on that topic, and thank you for the questions. Let's go ahead and move to our last topic of the day, which is human reliability analysis. We're going to start out with Jin Xing, and if I could have James Chang please come up and be ready for your aspect of the presentation. Jing and James are going to give the NRC human reliability analysis information, and then we're going to go to Mary Presley for the industry activities. So if you could please start off by introducing yourself.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Jing Xin, Senior Human Performance Engineer in the NRC Office of Nuclear Regulatory Research, Division of Risk Analysis. at human factors and the reliability branch. So today I'm going to talk about IDEA's current status. What is IDEAS? IDEAS standard for integrated human event analysis system. So it is a HRA methodology suite that's practical, state of the art, strong scientific basis, tied to data. It is human-centered, so it can be applied to all NRC domains and those even outside nuclear. It gives the detailed and the practical predictions on why there's human error and how to prevent and correct it. These slides give you an overview of the products we develop in IDEAS methodology. So organized in 4 categories: scientific and databases, methodology, application-specific method and guidance, and HRA practices. So in the scientific and databases, we developed the cognitive basis for HRA and IDEAS data, a human error database, and the human error handbook recently published. Also, the analysis of time uncertainty in simulator data. So in methodology, we have IDEAS general methodology from which application-specific method can be derived. And we have IDEAS data methodology for how to collect and use data in HRA. In the method section, earlier we worked with APRI. Together we developed the IDEAS at Power for internal at Power applications. And then we developed IDEAS ECA for NRC's event and condition assessment. And IDEAS dependency guidance, which is for modeling dependency between human actions. And currently, we are working on developing guidance for human error recovery. Yeah. And over the years, we have applied IDEAS ECA in a number of NRC's work areas, such as digital IC work environment, and for radioactive material handling, application in SPAR model. And currently, we are developing IDEAS ECA desktop guide to facilitate HRA practices. Next, please. Also, each of these products means to be used standalone. They all support each other. For example, we developed the IDEAS ECA from IDEAS general methodology supported by the cognitive and the databases. Next, please. And if we look at IDEAS data, the database, it's used for the human error probability calculation in IDEAS ECA, but it's also a useful resource for HR analysts to perform HRA practices. Next. So the keyword for IDEAS realism is data, data, and data. So over the decades of time, we developed the IDEAS human reliability database. This database contains thousands of human error data points that we evaluated, generalized, and integrated. The human error probability calculation in IDEAS method are based on the data. And we are continuously adding data and periodically update the human error probability calculation based on new data. And a company document we developed is a human error handbook. This 500-page report contains the verification, summary, and analysis of the data sources in the database. It helps the HR analyst to understand and model human events when they use the method. This improves the consistency of applying the IDEAS ECA. Next. I'm going to skip this slide because my coworker James Chen next will talk about Cicada database, which is one important data source we have in the human error database. Next. So where are we now on ideas? One thing we're doing is we are obtaining the user's feedback. So with NRC's Ideas ECA work group have applied the Ideas ECA on 14 SPAR model human failure event. So gain the experience and provide feedback. And thanks for PRA and BWR and the PWR owners group, they tested the method and provided us valuable feedback. So this feedback will be used in our developing the desktop guide. Another thing we are working on is completing the development of the detailed guidance. So right now we are thinking public comments on ideas dependency report and plan to update the report to NUREG 2258. So please, if you are interested, and welcome to give us a comment. We are also working on developing the guidance for crediting human error recovery. Next. So where are we going? So where the ideas, we often heard the question where the ideas ECA is heading. So our near-term goal is to make the method becoming the NRC's default HRA method for SDP and ASP analysis. Echoing Kevin talked this morning. So the state-of-the-art HRA method improves the current state of practice at the NRC. We are also establishing the program for periodic updates based on users' feedback and data. In the long run, we are going to explore uses of the method for other NRC's application areas, such as material safety and physical and cyber security, and possibly new areas coming up with advanced reactors. That's end up my presentation. Thank you.
Very good. James, if you would.
My name is James Chen. I'm the Senior Reliability and Risk Analyst of the Office of Research. Today, I want to talk about NRC's work on collecting the simulated data to inform human error probability estimate. Next slide, please. The licensees continuously routinely trains their operator in the simulated session to respond to the abnormal or emergency scenario, and that generates a lot of data. The program here that we're talking about try to tap into that data to inform the data basis of our human error probability estimate. And we took the two parallel approach. The first thing is to collect and analyze the data. The second was try to exchange these simulated based the human error probability information with the international organizations. Currently, that Junxin already mentioned that the simulated data that we analyze already factor into the number in the IDEA ECA to calculate the human error probabilities. And we currently also analyze the simulated data to additional analysis to inform the development of IDEA ECA desktop guide. That's our talk in my later slide. Next slide, please. The simulated data collection project I want to talk with is the collaboration we have with the South Texas project. In 2011, that we NRC and the STP established a MOU start in this collaboration, and we joined it with South Texas instructor, that's operator trainer, to develop this cicada system. That was a software that to be used in the STP's operator simulated training. And then the goal is that to improve the training effectiveness and efficiency, and at the same time, collected data that also can be used to inform the HEP estimates. We developed that 2011 signed a MOU, and then that early 2013 that software was developed, and then STP tried it and like it, and it's a continue to use the software to develop simulation scenario, and then also use the software to critique the operator performance. And then STP continued use it until the 2020 when COVID hit. That's stopped using the cicada. That give us the 8 years of very good data that STP's operator performance in a simulated setting. That's very good rich data for analysis. We not only use the cicada to collect the STP's data, we also try to expand the population that we use the cicada to analyze the simulated experiments that NRC participated, and then also try to outreach to the NRC's licenses to see if they want to establish similar collaboration as STP to provide the data, but that front didn't make much progress. And for the exchange the HI data, that activity that we in the past we have organized 4 international HI data workshop that to share the simulated data collection methodology methods and then the data. We also last year that we also renewed a 5 years MOU with Korean Atomic Energy Research Institute. That this is an institute that really have active the simulated data collection that analysis work not only for the existing fleet but also for the advanced reactors. Next slide, please. I want to talk about the what we do in the simulated data to inform this desktop guide. The reason of this developing the desktop guide was the NRC internal and then also APRI that separately to exercise the ideal ECA method and then that provide the feedback. One of these common comment was some of these performance influencing factor attribute used in the ideal ECA that the way description is too generic. That need to be that can be the description can be more enhanced to tie into the reactor operation that for safety analysis that type of context, and so that would improve the reliability and then consistency of the analysts using the method. So that was the main one of the main comments. Our recommendation was to develop the desktop guide. So what we do in the desktop guide that is on the simulator side, we put more analysis on the simulated data that we have to from the simulator data. That one way to provide is the nuclear safety operation that context to try to enhance the description of these performance influencing factors, and then that if that's additional data that we got empirical data from the simulator that also can enhance. In addition, that in the past 2 years, we work with APRI jointly host 2 workshops with support from the PWR and BWR owner group. One objective of this workshop is taking the operators, their language, their example, their description that help us to provide that nuclear safety context linked to the performance influencing factors that in the idea ECA. In addition, that we are in the lower resource, but we still exploring the additional data source for the SCADA that we use the opportunity when we have that to do the outreach. So the past 2 years, we also have talked to the X Energy and then that Japanese nuclear regulator and industry to explore their interest in using the SCADA to collect the performance information in simulator setting. Next slide, please. This will be my final slide. I want to say that when we talk about the data that people can immediately think about, okay, this is the action and this is probability. Now that we are in this new generation, the HI method, we are talking about much more rich information, contextual rich information about the data. The table shown here is one simulation scenario. Each row represents a human important activity that's in the scenario. This activity including detecting information, understanding the situation, making decision, or perform the manual action to change the user interface to change the event progression. And you see that each of these rows that present this important human activity that has all this context information that we present in the performance influencing factor fashion. That's what's the situation in this in the context that this action was performed, and then that has evaluation of the crew performance. So this does, if thinking about this, multiple crew perform the scenario, and then the multiple scenario perform in the training session, and then that's a we correct this in the 7-8 years. That's really provided the solid the database to analyze the inform the idea ECA on the context dominant important for inform the human error probability. So that concludes my presentation.
Thanks. Let's go ahead and go to Mary Presley for the industry perspectives, and then we'll go ahead and open up for Q&A. So don't go too far, you two. Mary, are you with us? You should be able to unmute.
Yes, I'm on. Can you guys hear me?
Very well, thank you. Please proceed.
Wonderful. The slide, I don't see the slides on the webcast yet.
We're getting them.
Okay. All right, so I'll go ahead and start talking while that catches up. So we're going to talk a little bit about HRA realism, and I'm going to touch on, oh, you got to go down. Yeah. One more. There we go. We're going to touch on realism on the terms of assessing individual HFEs. We're going to take a little look at dependency analysis and recovery actions. So I'm going to skip over some slides in the interest of time and kind of hit it high level, and then can answer some more detailed questions if there are any. So if you want to advance 2 slides, 3 slides, one more. There we go. So the HRA user group led by EPRI is kind of keeper of some of the industry methodologies and puts out the HRA calculator, which is a toolbox that implements the HRA methodologies. And the EPRI HRA methodology is one of the tools within the toolbox. And it's a pretty mature methodology. It's been used across the industry. I think all the US plants use it, and many international plants use it as well. We've had a lot of experience on it, and we've provided a lot of training and guidance to ensure that the methods are well understood and applied fairly consistently, or as consistently as possible. And over the last 20 years, we've kind of continuously updated the methodology as new contexts and new staff have come in. And so some examples of where we've extended the methodology, fire. So we worked with the NRC on new Reg 1921 and the supplements to update the methodology for fire. And then we kind of took that same approach and updated it for seismic. We looked at main control and abandonment, flex, and now digital. And over that same time, while we haven't updated the human error probabilities in the method, we've monitored data collection activities and trends to make sure that we're not needing to majorly alter our methods. So our existing methods are pretty mature for the individual HFEs. And I do want to mention that some of the trends we're seeing more recently are closer interactions between the HRA practitioners and operations, both in refining the HRA and then making sure those insights from the HRA get included into operations. So I think from a realism perspective, that's actually, it's not just the improvement of the methods, but the implementation of the methods, and that back and forth with operations has been kind of a leap forward. And we've also increased our tech transfer and quality of training, again, to ensure that the methods are being applied and as consistently as possible. So next slide. So one of the particular areas we're currently working on is HRA for digital systems. Started with the questions, how applicable are the existing methods to digital systems? And do we need to, or can we update it with more data? And so we put out at the bottom of that slide, you can see the report number. It's our kind of draft report or tech update. We've done the research to look at the failure modes and how that compares with our existing HRA methods, where we could find quantitative data, which we have a couple of sources. We try to understand how that might impact the HEPs, and we've put together some guidance on how to use our existing methods and when they need to be augmented to account fully for the digital context. If you want to go to the next slide. A big part of that guidance or that discussion is, well, what is digital? And digital can range from, simple replacement of an analog display with a digital display, all the way to some of these advanced reactor concepts, remote operations, fully autonomous, and you have an operator just kind of monitoring many units. So one of the things that report really seeked to try to do is draw a circle of what are the types of designs that our existing methods can do well, and where do we really need to maybe think differently. So that's part of the scope of that report. Next slide. So the main insights from that report was that overall, operators are more reliable and well-designed and implemented digital systems compared to analog designs. But there can still be human error traps that survive the V&V process. And so we need to make sure that those are understood and the HRA analysts know how to identify those. Review of the data didn't eliminate or invalidate any of the failure modes or PSFs in our current HRA methods, but there were a few new failure modes and mechanisms that were revealed, particularly around automation, trust in automation, and different operating modes. So the last piece is the large chunks of quantitative data that we have were, from early plant training cycles for some of the digital plants, and we do understand that we may still be in the burn-in phase, so some of those insights may be on the conservative side, and they'll kind of taper down as we ramp up more digital control rooms. Next slide. So one last piece on the digital is on human errors of commission. I know there's been some discussion, particularly for advanced reactors, on how should we model human errors of commission. And I think it's really important that we use the right tools for the right tasks. And traditionally, PRA has not been the tool to look at human errors of commission from a open-ended search for anything that can happen. It's not the right tool, and they're typically ground ruled out unless there's a specific cause, like spurious indications due to fire. There are other tools that are really good for specifically looking for errors of commission. STPA particularly is designed to find these types of systemic errors. And so looking at them on the human factors side and in other programs may be a better fit for analyzing errors of commission without necessarily trying to wedge everything into the PRA that doesn't quite fit that way. Next. So next in the digital, we're still looking at other opportunities to continue to collect data, particularly for advanced plants, as we'd like to understand how some of the concept of operations are converging on specific, technologies or specific ways of working that will help us narrow our focus. And again, we have the draft guidance out there. People are using it, and we're waiting for feedback before we update that again. And then we're harmonizing the HRA methods with our human factors methods. So again, we're looking at the same data, same insights, both on the design side and the post-design assessment. Next slide, please. Another thing that we've been working on, I'm not going to speak too much about this because Jing and James both mentioned some of the work that we've been doing with the NRC to help out on providing some feedback on testing for ideas ECA and some feedback on the user's guide. That's ongoing. I think it's important to note, I have heard anecdotally from some of our users that the use of ideas in the regulatory process, particularly in SDPs, has actually been very nice because they have to go down to the specific factors. It gives a little bit more flexibility and ability to talk about the specifics so they can refine more and get more realistic HEPs between the NRC analysts and the industry analysts. So we're on the right track when it comes to ideas. We do still need the user's guide to help with consistency. I think that's still an open item. And then the last piece, ideas recovery, I believe is still out there and being worked on. But that will be an important addition when it does come out. And I think it's necessary to have some industry and operations feedback to ensure realism in the recovery area, because that's typically an important piece of the overall HRA picture. Next slide. So one of the other pieces that we're working on is improving HRA dependency analysis. Our existing methods are kind of a brute force approach that was intentionally designed to be conservative, and then you can refine down to be more realistic. However, it's extremely time intensive to do that level of refinement cut set by cut set, and it's very cumbersome to maintain. So we had an ideation workshop in 2021 with folks from academia, NRC, industry, national labs, to look at where the core issues are, both from an efficiency perspective and from a realism perspective, and honed in on 6 areas to work on. And finally, this year we're publishing the new dependency method. It's called the Credible Dependent Failure Mechanism, CDFM method, and that integrates the research we did on these 6 areas. The approach has been piloted on multiple plants, and it looks for a directed search for coupling factors so that dependencies can be modeled up front into the PRA logic to the extent possible, similar to how CCFs are done. That makes the model much more efficient in many ways. And then using the minimum joint AGP as a method to capture unanalyzed dependencies or residual risk. So this is ready for use. We're waiting for an industry volunteer, but it's available, and we believe that it'll help with realism. We will be having well, that's there's some other industry happenings that there's a new method Constellation put out. It went through an NDM peer review with a simplified dependency process, also aimed at removing conservatisms. So we're going to look at that as well as ideas dependency in our new method and kind of do a pros cons comparison either at the end of this year or early next year, so folks know how to differentiate between the methods. Next slide, which is my last, I believe. Oh, sorry. Yeah, next slide. Oh. So the final topic is on crediting recovery actions. In general, ensuring recovery is appropriately credited is really important to PRA realism. It's not an area that we have a lot of formal guidance on. So I think that's an area where we can do better on at least documenting the state of practice. We do have an upcoming, at the end of the year, joint owners group, PRA workshop, where we're going to bring the risk folks and the operations staff together and discuss recovery and I think dependency as well to understand where we can target improvements in the process. And then of course, ideas recovery. We're looking forward to interacting with the NRC on that as well, to the extent that we're allowed. So I think that's all we have.
Thank you, and thanks to all three of our speakers on human reliability analysis. Let's go ahead and open the floor to any of our three speakers on the topic. If you have a question in the room, I'll run the microphone to you. If not, we'll go to Barry on the line. Barry, go ahead. You should be able to unmute.
Okay. This question is for Mr. Chang on the use of simulator data. I'm wondering if there is a documented basis to support the assumption that simulator data can be applied to real events.
Simulated data that have is provide the most the data sources we have for the most context similar to the event that we are interested in. It certainly is not the same as the event, but considering that the providing the statistics that are able to provide a statistic that's the best data source we can have.
But there's no basis to support using it other than it's the best you have.
I won't say that no basis. There's a good database, but not equal to one-to-one. Certainly, there's a consideration that how you the data collected, how you transform to the context we use in the PRA that try to simulate the real event situations. That's a transform the data that how to use in the PRA context.
I'll follow this up later. Thank you.
Okay, sure.
Jeff Mittman. Jeff, you should be able to unmute. All right, Jeff, can you try again? You should be able to unmute.
All right, there we go. So the question is, how much of the ideas methodology has been incorporated into the PRA HRA calculator?
That sounds like a question for Mary.
So none of it has been incorporated into the calculator yet.
does that imply that there's not much use of ideas by the industry?
So the NRC has a software, and that tool they can get from the NRC, and that's really helpful for. It's not a database like the calculator that you can do all your HFEs and correlate. It's kind of you do one at a time and you save the file. So I think industry typically uses ideas in things like SCPs or one-offs where they're trying to look at specific HFEs. But no one that I'm aware of is using ideas to replace the existing methodology.
Thank you.
All right, any further questions on this topic?
Can I just say that we don't rule out putting ideas in the HRA calculator. It's just we're kind of waiting for the user guide to be out and the dust to settle a little, and getting some of the other calculator priorities finished. So it's kind of a funding and timing issue, not a we refuse to.
Thanks for the clarification, Mary. Mohammed, you should be able to unmute and ask your question at this time.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
You were there, yes.
Yeah, so thank you for the presentation. My question is if there will be any Linux version of the IDS software. So currently we have the desktop version, but would you have a Linux version of the software so that it can be coupled with simulation modules, especially, for example, when we are coupling physics of failure with like human performance models?
Sorry, Mohammed, are you talking about the IDEA software, IDEA ECA software?
Yes.
Yes, NRC has implemented IDEA ECA in software for many years. But if you can contact the workshop organizer, and then they will contact us. So that was to know your specific need for NRC to make the decision about the software.
Yeah, my question is there is a Linux version, not the desktop version?
Oh.
Like Linux?
No, we only for the Microsoft Windows system. We didn't develop it for the Linux system. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
All right, any further questions before we go ahead and move to close? Looks like we have one more. Tim, go ahead. You should be, there you are.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, a question for Jane. You had mentioned in your presentation that you're considering using, I think it was the IDEAS methods for physical and cybersecurity. Can you maybe elaborate on what your thoughts are there?